So thank you so much, Wendy, for being here and talking about the exhibition and about your work. I really appreciate it. And it's lovely to be in a physical space with other humans. I thought it might be a good way to begin just by you maybe just giving a brief introduction to the work in the exhibition, because you're probably much better at that than me.
I'm not sure about that. Yes, it is great to be here, and thanks very much for inviting me, Christina. So we're in a beautiful room in Inverleith House in the Botanical Gardens in Edinburgh, and as Christina said, it's great to be back in a gallery. So it's been a fantastic, albeit distanced, experience to be able to install this work. And I've installed two pieces of work for a group show called Florilegium, a gathering of flowers, which has been curated by Emma Nicholson from our BGE creative programs. So two quite different bodies of work. The work that I was doing last year was very much based on flowers, a series of flower portraits incorporating various digital methods. So that's how I kind of unexpectedly sort of came into discussion with the curator of Florilegium for possible participation in this show. But this year, as everybody that's watching is aware, has been a very peculiar year, 2020. And earlier this year, my mother unexpectedly passed away in March, beginning of March. And at the same time as her health was sort of declining, I have a small garden just beyond the studio. It's not a walled rose garden, it's a tiny city garden. But I noticed, in early spring, this odd plant starting to grow. It's actually been there for a few years, but I'd been looking at it, chucked it in by a wall, threatening to dig it up and then being too busy. I'm sure as many people that are listening to this also were very, your life is so full of other things. I just used to stagger out there occasionally in the studio, look at it, think I must do something about that, let it go. But then anyway, this year, 2020, it started to grow very rapidly. This must have been a plant that I'd bought, maybe a garden or something years ago. And my brother-in-law actually, who is a tree surgeon, one of the very few people actually to visit the house during that period, because it was complete lockdown. Everybody was very isolated. He came out to the garden and he said, "I said, you're really lucky." He said, "That's a very special cardiocrinum." And as soon as he said the word, of course, went straight onto the computer and did a bit of research and thought, wow, that's really interesting. It's a gigantic Himalayan lily. I didn't know what type of cardiocrinum it was at that point. But every day, as I'm sure everybody was looking outside, at that time, needing to be outside, I would go outside and watch this thing. And the growing of this flower, this plant at that stage, it was mirroring, this sort of situation with my mum, and her sort of decline. So that became a very interesting thing to do. Usually I'd go out. This piece behind me is made up of two things. It's made up of a series of photographs, all shot in the garden, and also a piece of text, which really chronicles the development of the growth of the flower, but also, my mum's sort of illness, her admission to hospital, and her swift demise. So the two things came, obviously very unexpectedly together and started to make this piece of work. And Florilegium came along the exhibition at just the right time, I think, to sort of make a piece of work that was really about, I suppose, the critical sort of importance of the natural world, in our lives. So, I think that flowers clearly, sort of are sort of metaphors for sort of growth, death, and renewal, and sort of the history of reproduction of flowers and still life painting And latterly in photography has always been there, and that's something that I guess, I've always been interested in making pictures that are a bit, that you can load them with metaphor if you want. But yeah, so that's how Night Garden evolved.
Thank you for that. And I have to say, as a volunteer at the exhibition, invigilating the space, this room really does, it's a very personal body of work, but it really seems to resonate with a lot of people. And I think that's talking about a pandemic and, something on such a huge scale, within that huge amount of pain and the problems of this year, there are, personal stories. And so to exhibit such personal work, I think is really important, because actually in the highly personal, people can relate. And it's exactly as you say, I think flowers in the natural world, we all tend to go to for solace and for some kind of sense of familiarity and something, quantifiable in these kinds of situations. And I don't know, I was wondering the way in which so much of our existence at the moment is through the digital realm. I've noticed quite a tendency for a lot of photographers and everyone to really be returning to nature in some way, and returning to really focusing on looking at the natural world. Do you think that that's something that we will continue to see as a reaction to the pandemic and lockdown and being so isolated indoors?
Yeah, I think there's a massive sort of interest in that across lots of different sort of areas, whether it's sort of photography, painting, sculpture. There's a massive interest too in terms of photography in a revisiting of sort of sustainability, which I think also sort of ties in with this sort of interest in sort of natural world. So, a lot of photographers now are thinking about the physical impact, for example, of sort of photography in the natural world, which I think is using alternative methods. So that's something that, yes, I do think that it's something definitely that people are sort of returning to, whether or not that's something it'll be interesting to see, if that is something sustained. I think that, from my own perspective, I think it's important to sort of make work that is really about the world immediately around you, and I think that with Night Garden, that literally was, the world outside the window. And, I think we've all seen sort of many sort of photographic projects that are just that, which are people just shooting from their window, which again, I think is really poignant, because you mentioned before about the people's response to the work, because it's so personal work, they can relate to it. And I think that is what we're all seeking, is sort of to have some feeling of community, or where we can sort of meet and, we can sort of talk about and discuss these things together. So yeah, I'm seeing that sort of coursing across lots of different sort of artist practices. And also there's a real pleasure in it, there's a joy. And I think that's something that actually, you can't discount. You try and make things that kind of respond to the times you're living in. For me, it was a very personal thing. And this is always something that I've done, is that, you use your work to try and come to terms with, the things that are in your life. So, there's nothing bigger than the death of, one of your parent, or a child or sort of family member. So I think that for me, the natural reaction always is to go to the camera or to the computer or to whoever it is, to try to make sense of it. And I think, artists have done that from time immemorial. It's just great. It's lovely to find what is such a perfect situation for the work now, which is, we're sitting in a room here and I'm talking to you, and sort of we're looking at two windows and you're just seeing the most beautiful sort of garden setting. So, it is special to have that kind of, and also people have found this place, the gardens itself, just very comforting, and it's been nice. It's been a very enjoyable project to be part of in that respect.
I really agree that so much of making anything, I think, can be such a therapeutic process. But I often forget that also for people looking at it, it's also a form of a therapeutic process just in the looking. And I think that it's such a lovely exchange, and exactly, I think the gardens and this exhibition has been a real refuge for people, just to, you know, get out of their immediate environment and think about other, you know, just other experiences and to be in a different space. Talking about exhibitions and how lovely this particular exhibition is, and what an important, you know, thing that it exists right now, and there's so little available kind of for people to do and for people to engage with. How do you think that galleries and that showing work is going to evolve after this pandemic, and do you think that actually physically exhibiting work, I mean, in this room you'll see, I mean, what you'll know, the physical experience of being in the room is so fundamental to looking at the images, and that's something that when we're consistently looking at images online we don't get to kind of enjoy. How do you think going forward in a kind of integrated or more integrated digital physical photographic environment, what do you think the future is, the immediate future for exhibiting work?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one, you know, and this is something that I think about all the day, all the time when I'm working with young photographers, you know, and it's also something that, you know, I myself experience is that, you know, I always think that, you know, work isn't completed actually until it is in the public realm. Yeah, so that's the closing of the sort of circle. But the public realm can mean lots of different things. You know, I mean, the public realm, okay, work looks great in a gallery. You know, there's no denying that I don't think this work the room that we're sitting in now, I don't think this work could find a better situation. But that's not to say it's the only way to comprehend or understand it. You know, so people are, you know, doing sort of web-based pieces, they're doing projections, they're using the work to create kind of distant workshops, they're workshopping with others, they're coming together in collectives, that, you know, they're creating discussion and dialogue in a group environment. So there's lots of different ways, I think, that you can develop work. I mean, the work in this room, Night Garden, was all shot relatively recently. It was shot in 2020. But the pieces behind you, Christina, the flower pieces, you know, these were ongoing for over a year, maybe more. And it was just something that I would do when I had some downtime from my other work and jobs. And I think the thing about that is that you have to keep shooting, you know, you have to keep making the work. If you don't have the work, you're never going to be able to do anything. So, you know, I think that what has been, and I know that from a lot of other photographers and artists, they have said this, and we were talking about it, you know, downstairs earlier. I think having the, you know, a little bit more headspace sometimes, in, you know, that after the beginning of lockdown, to really sort of think through ideas and be quite sort of thoughtful about what you want to do has been really quite helpful. Yes, the ideal, I think, it's beautiful to show in a gallery, but it's certainly just one small way of making work, generating ideas. I do think it's now practice has to be much more kind of inherently collective in its nature, because I think it's very difficult to do things on your own. And I certainly, that's something that I always say to sort of like younger photographers, is that don't wait for other people to curate you into shows, because you might wait a long time. You know, get together with other people whose ideas you really respect and admire, you want to work with, and do things yourself. I mean, that's always been a great way of working. Take more autonomy. There's definitely going to be very challenging sort of futures, you know, and there's not going to be the funding. So that will then affect the way that you make things. But people will always be creative.
I really enjoyed what you said about the fact that there is a more community, not necessarily more, but there is this potential for a more community-driven way of showing and experiencing work with the kind of digital element. But for me, it is so fundamentally different being in a space and actually moving through a space and having the sensory experience of looking at work physically. It's the same with prints, it's the same with photo books. You know, photography as object, I think, is such a different thing, and it's this thing that we're currently all kind of grappling with at the moment, is how many pictures exist in so many different formats. It's kind of the same with nature. You know, for me, photographing nature is is always very difficult because it's such a sensory thing. And it's only like a sliver of kind of what you're experiencing. But maybe talking a bit about prints and the actual tactility of photography as prints and as objects. Prints seem to be something that is less and less common to come into contact with as a young photographer and for young people, and it was quite eye-opening for me when I studied to see actual darkroom prints. That was absolutely mind-blowing to me. So on the subject of prints and collecting work and printing photography, buying photography, and studies editions, which was just launched last week, was it, or the week before? What do you think it is that makes prints so special, and why do you think they're having a bit of a renaissance as well?
Well, I mean, I think that again, it's like, for me, certainly, because I always work very digitally. I mean, I'm not an analogue photographer. I mean, as soon as it was possible to shoot digitally, as I did, I was quite happy to leave film behind. Sorry for all these film lovers that are listening to this. But after saying that, I think that one of my things a year ago was I said, I'm actually going to make prints of everything that I produce, because it's like, I was realising that, I was producing tons of material and I wasn't always printing it out. So now I always do make prints. And I think it's really important, photographers that are listening to this out there, to actually make small prints of the work. Now there's a number of reasons for that, because obviously if you're going to show your work to somebody, and one of the ways that obviously pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, people share their work with others is by sharing portfolio boxes of prints. And I don't think, again, until you see your work printed out, you can really understand it. I mean, it's interesting what you're saying about, I know that you, Christina, are interested too in photographing the natural world. I mean, for Night Garden, I think you talked about can't remember your expression you used, it, a sliver of reality. You can only catch a sliver of it. I completely respond to that. And I think that for that reason, that's why with Night Garden, I decided I was going to make it a project which is made up of multiple images and text, and not a way that I'd ever worked before. So you're responding to different facets of the garden and the environment as it changed. I mean, the main image in Night Garden is the cardiocrinum in flower. And when this thing did flower, it was nearly 4 meters tall, and it scented up to an acre of land. So highly fragrant. So unfortunately, you can't see that in the photograph, but when you walked out to the garden at dusk, this scent hit you. So, but and then I also wanted to show when the flowers had gone. And when I look at my garden now, it's just this huge, big brown, like telephone mast staff with these flapping black leaves. And to me, that is a very powerful and comforting and cathartic thing, because, it's through the growth and the renewal of the plant that I can then mark time, which is exactly what photographs do so well, is that you look back at a photograph of somebody, especially of children, and you see literally the passing of time very clearly laid out in front of you.
When you mentioned about the fragrance of the flower, when I first looked at this work and read the text, and you read about the fragrance because it's mentioned in the text, you get like a phantom smell. Imagine this, maybe that's just me, but you start to think, can I smell the flower? You do kind of get a sense of that sensory experience through reading about it. So I think, that has, maybe there's a few slivers of the experience.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Maybe that's a future show, olfactory. Yeah, taking notes here for drama. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I mean, I absolutely agree. The evocative power of scent, and there are interesting links there to photography.
That physical relationship between books and paper and materials. You say that you've made a point of printing everything this year and printing everything that you're working on. What would what's that like? Because I think it's quite a novelty to a lot of people, the idea of having printed work. And
I don't like to hear you say that.
Sorry. But at least to me, it makes the prints that I buy and the prints that I have incredibly special, because they are such a rare thing for me.
Yeah, I mean I mean, you know, this is interesting, you know, and I think that this is something that clearly the way that photography has evolved is that that the images on your phone become like the daguerreotype, you know, the portable album, the photograph. I mean, I certainly know that my daughters look at family photography and photography far more often than my generation would have, or even your generation. So they're very kind of sophisticated consumers of photography or images, I think. And that's really different. So, you know, the family album has changed out of all recognition. So we're not making hard prints, but on the other hand, photography is in a way much more interesting now than it's ever been. I won't go down that road because it's another 30-minute conversation. But, you know, yeah, I mean, I think that we do have this kind of sort of absolute sort of desire for, there's nothing like standing in front of a picture. I mean, yesterday I went to see the Surrealist rehang at the Gallery of Modern Art, which it was great, you know, and I was standing in front of these very, very well-known pieces of work, you know, Dali, Magritte, and seeing them as physical objects, you know, and seeing the marks of the hand and the making, it's a really special thing. And I think that you've just got to remember that you have to actually physically make it. And this is this interesting thing. I think this is also something that's a huge part of Night Garden to me, because when you're gone, when you're dead, you know, like my mum is dead, when I'm dead, I know that what will be left behind me? Well, there might be some prints that were in frames. They'll survive as long as photographs survive, but it's, you know, it's the permanency of it. I think that's a real thing. You know, this wanting to make objects that outlast you. That's kind of interesting. I mean, there's a whole other debate we'd get into about sort of museums and collecting, and it's just.
I think, yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the very special things about stationary, printed, finite pictures is that, you know, as you say, we look at pictures through glass all the time, through our phones, through our computers, but there's something for me very comforting about the stillness and the finality of a piece of paper, essentially, behind a piece of glass that doesn't need to buffer or load or run out of battery. You know, it's always there, it's going to be there, it's locked down, it's pinned down. Oh no, not locked down, but it's fixed. And with so much being digital now, and with the pace of digital material, which is designed, you know, to keep our attention moving, there is, to me, I think, something very restful about print that is fixed.
Yeah, I mean, this did occur to me when I was working on this piece, because Florilegium intervened and put an end to the work. Yeah, so, and this is what I love about photography. And I love about making exhibitions is that, so you have a finite amount of time, you've got a finite budget obviously as well, and you have to decide, you know, what you need, and in my opinion it should be the minimum you need to tell the story effectively, okay? But after saying that, I've just described the plant that's now growing in my garden. This piece could go on and on as the memories fade, you know, and the object itself changes. So, you know, you could remake it as a piece that was, you know, encompassed a much longer duration, but COVID intervened and the exhibition came around and it happened like this. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing as well about working to projects, which is really a good thing actually as a sort of like younger photographer or somebody who's just starting, to set yourself these kind of goals where you complete pieces and you even do installations, sort of mock-ups, and you know, then you try and make it real, you try and make it into reality. There's lots of ways to do that. It's really interesting to get the feedback. I mean, this is something that's very kind of odd and difficult for people at this point in time, because, you know, people aren't having the communications that they normally have. But after saying that, you know, I think it's great that the show, you know, has had such good audiences and people have responded to it. So that's lucky.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to check the time because I can hear movement. Yes, that's probably all we've got time for.
Oh, unfortunately.
I've got so many more questions. But,
well, did you get what you needed?
Yes, no, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.